Johnny Carson was halfway through a joke about the new tax bill when something in the audience made him freeze. Not stumble, not pause, but completely stop, as if someone had pulled the plug on The Tonight Show's most famous heartbeat. Row 7. Seat 9. A man sitting awkwardly forward, shoulders tight, hands locked together like he wasn't sure he belonged there. His hair was gray, unevenly cut, his jacket worn at the elbows, his face tired in the way only years of sleeping outside can carve into a human being. But Johnny Carson knew that face. And for the first time in his career, the man who'd perfected calm felt the ground tilt under him. To everyone else, it looked like Johnny had momentarily forgotten the punchline. Ed McMahon was already shifting, preparing to fill the space. But Johnny wasn't searching for the joke he'd lost. He was staring at a ghost from a life he rarely spoke about. A ghost named Michael "Mickey" Callahan, the first comedian Johnny had ever taken under his wing. The man he once believed would surpass him. The man who'd vanished almost 30 years ago. For a moment, Johnny thought his mind was playing tricks, conjuring memories of a life he'd buried beneath fame, schedules, and the relentless rhythm of television. But the longer he stared, the more undeniable the truth became. Mickey Callahan, the kid Johnny had once believed in more than he believed in himself, was sitting in the audience looking like life had beaten him in every possible way. And Johnny felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Fear. The kind that comes when the past doesn't knock, but kicks the door in. He tried to continue the monologue. He really did. One sentence, maybe two. But the words felt wrong in his mouth, like he was lying to the audience by pretending nothing earth-shattering had just happened. Finally, he lowered the cue card and said quietly, almost too quietly for the mic, "Mickey?" The crowd laughed. They thought it was part of the act. But Johnny wasn't joking. His eyes were locked on the man in row 7, whose shoulders sank deeper, as if he wished he could disappear into the fabric of the seat. "Mickey Callahan," Johnny repeated, louder this time. Ed's head tilted, the recognition flashing across his face. He knew the name. Everyone on the old comedy circuit did. Mickey Callahan, the firecracker Irish kid with timing sharper than a razor, punchlines that could split a room open, and charisma you couldn't learn. A kid who, at 22, had the industry whispering, "The next big thing." A kid Johnny had helped get his first Tonight Show appearance back in the early 60s. And a kid who had walked away from everything without explanation. Johnny stepped off the mark, down the stairs, and toward the audience. Murmurs spread like sparks in dry grass. No host had ever walked off mid-monologue. Not once. Not in the entire history of the show. "Mickey," Johnny said again when he reached the row. "Is that really you?" The man looked up, and there it was, the spark. Faint, buried under exhaustion and weathered years, but still Mickey. He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Johnny," he said softly. "Didn't think you'd notice." The studio fell into absolute silence. 300 people holding their breath, unsure what they were witnessing. Johnny looked at the director. "Cut the cameras. Clear the audience." Nobody moved at first. The director hesitated. This was unthinkable. A Tonight Show taping was a machine that never stopped. But Johnny Carson wasn't making a request. He was issuing a command. "Clear the studio," he repeated. Within minutes, the audience was ushered out. The crew powered down equipment. Only Johnny, Mickey, Ed, and a handful of veteran staff remained. Johnny sat beside Mickey, not on stage, not elevated, but level with him, eye to eye like the old days in dingy comedy clubs. "What happened?" Johnny asked. No TV host polish, just raw concern. Mickey laughed, a broken sound. "Life happened, and I wasn't built for it." The story came in fragments at first, then in waves. How after his Tonight Show debut, everything hit at once. Fame, opportunity, the overwhelming pressure to stay funny every night. How the panic attacks started during his first national tour. How he hid them with alcohol, then pills. How he burned bridges trying to outrun fear that only got faster. How clubs stopped booking him. How he was dropped by his agent. How, in 1974, after bombing in Chicago, he disappeared. "I didn't want you to see what I'd become," Mickey whispered. "You gave me everything, Johnny. You believed in me, and I wasted it." Johnny stared at him, stunned. He remembered Mickey's promise, said backstage before that first Tonight Show set. "When I make it big, I'm taking you with me." Johnny had laughed then, telling him he didn't need help from a kid. But secretly, he'd believed Mickey might be the future of comedy. "I didn't know where you went," Johnny finally said. "No one did." "I didn't go anywhere," Mickey said bitterly. "Just down." He'd spent years drifting from job to job, line cook, taxi driver, night janitor. He lived in cheap motels until the money ran out, then shelters, then the streets. For the past year, he'd been living behind a liquor store in Van Nuys. "My sister saved up to buy me this ticket," Mickey said. "She wanted me to see you again. Said maybe it would help. I told her you wouldn't even notice me." Johnny swallowed hard. "I noticed." Ed, who'd remained respectfully silent, finally spoke. "Mickey, we've heard your name for decades. Johnny never forgot you." Mickey looked down, ashamed. "I didn't want to ruin your night." "You didn't ruin anything," Johnny said fiercely. "You made me remember something important." He turned to his producer. "Call Sierra Recovery Clinic. Tell them it's Johnny Carson. And tell them I'm bringing someone in tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." Mickey tensed. "Johnny, no. I can't take your—" "It's not charity," Johnny said firmly. "It's a debt I've owed for 25 years." Mickey shook his head. "I don't deserve help." "You deserve a chance," Johnny said. "Everyone does." The call was made. A bed was secured. Johnny personally drove Mickey to the facility. Along the way, they talked about the early days, the cramped clubs, the long drives between gigs, the nights when they were broke but hungry for the stage. Mickey confessed he'd kept every letter Johnny had sent in the early years, even when he had nowhere to put them. At the clinic, the medical team took Mickey in gently, respectfully. Johnny stayed until almost 2 a.m., making sure Mickey was settled. "Why are you doing this?" Mickey asked again. Johnny answered simply, "Because someone should have helped you a long time ago, and I should have been that someone." The next morning, Johnny called Mickey's sister. She cried when he told her brother was safe. Over the next months, Johnny visited Mickey often, quietly, without cameras, without press. Mickey fought through detox, through therapy, through the trauma he'd buried under jokes for years. Some days, he wanted to quit. Johnny wouldn't let him. "You survived the hardest part," Johnny would say. "Now, let the world meet you again." 6 months later, Mickey walked out of the clinic, clean, clear-eyed, ready. Johnny got him an apartment, helped him reconnect with his sister, found him a writing job on a comedy show, behind the scenes at first, where there was less pressure but plenty of purpose. A year to the day after Mickey Callahan sat in row 7, Johnny brought him back onto The Tonight Show, not as a lost soul, but as a man who'd found his footing again. "This is Mickey Callahan," Johnny told the audience, "the funniest man I've ever known, and a reminder that life can knock you down, but it doesn't have to keep you there." The applause was thunderous. Mickey broke into tears, and Johnny, for the second time in his career, did something unscripted. He hugged him. For years afterward, Mickey wrote for television, performed occasionally in small clubs, and lived quietly but proudly. He once told a reporter, "People say Johnny Carson saved my life, but the truth is, he just reminded me I still had one." Johnny never aired the footage from the night he stopped his monologue. It remained a legend whispered among staff, a reminder of what mattered more than ratings or fame. And Mickey Callahan never forgot the moment everything changed. When a man on stage stopped mid-joke, looked into a crowd of strangers, and recognized a friend who thought the world had forgotten him. Because sometimes all it takes to save a life is seeing the person no one else sees. But Mickey's story didn't end with that triumphant night on The Tonight Show. In the months that followed, something remarkable happened. Mickey began rediscovering the version of himself he thought had died somewhere between cheap motels and lonely sidewalks. He started mentoring younger comedians, the kind of kids who reminded him of who he used to be: hungry, terrified, and desperate to matter. And every time one of them asked how he got his start, Mickey would smile and simply say, "Someone believed in me before I believed in myself." He never used Johnny's name. He didn't need to. The people who knew already knew. Johnny visited often, quietly slipping into the back of whatever club Mickey was working in, watching his old friend build a new life from the ashes of an old one. And Mickey, who once thought his story was nothing but failure, began to realize that survival, real survival, was its own kind of success. He wasn't famous again, not in the way he'd once dreamed of, but he was alive, sober, working, and loved. And for the first time in decades, that was enough. Because some comebacks don't happen under bright lights. Some happen in the heart, one quiet night at a time.